Now I'd like to invite Professor Daphna, head of the Women and Gender Studies program in the Faculty of Law at Tel Aviv University, who will speak on the topic, Gender Equality, Moving Beyond the Backlash.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be part of this event and so very happy that the Down the Vid Foundation has decided to dedicate the prize in the present category to gender equality and to nominate Professor Gita Sen and Professor Devorah Dennis as the laureates. One might wonder why gender equality is not part of the past category, but rather was chosen to reflect current excellence and accomplishment. We could have celebrated the extraordinary past achievements of the intellectual and activist feminist movement. Indeed, I would argue that the feminist movement is the most important social movement of the 20th century, and that there is hardly anything within our current social, economic, or personal lives that can be understood detached from these achievements. Academia is in fact one outstanding example, and if you saw the wonderful film on Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I need add little more. From a very recent reality in which women were not allowed to study at Harvard, let alone teach at this prestigious university, female students account for half of Harvard's student body today and a third of its professors. Notwithstanding the feminist movement's past achievements, the Dan David Foundation's decision to choose gender equality as the topic for the present category is extremely timely, important, and even urgent. The feminist revolution is far from being completed. In many parts of the world, women still lack an equal right to education and participation in the paid labor force, have very limited access to basic health services, and suffer from severe physical, sexual, and economic violence in their homes. But the feminist revolution is not completed even for women who live in countries that allegedly grant them basic equal rights. This is so, among other reasons, because while women enter the paid labor force, men have yet to enter the private sphere. In Israel, the statistics teach us that less than 1% of fathers who are entitled to paternity leave execute this right. Moreover, a recent study found that among couples with children, the fathers spend 17 hours more than the mothers in paid work per week on average, while the mothers spend 29 hours more than the fathers on housework and childcare. When the paid work and unpaid work add up, it turns out that mothers work on average 12 hours more than fathers every week. In fact, the paid labor market is still constructed on a masculine model that assumes employees have no family responsibilities, making it almost impossible for men to become equal partners at home, even if they wish to. So we have the male public sphere versus the female private sphere, and the impact of this ongoing dichotomy on women's ability to participate in the public sphere on equal footing is devastating. Women are centered in what is called pink-collar occupations, such as teaching, nursing, and secretarial work, which are on the continuum of what women are already doing at home and what are considered female tasks. These occupations are also not rewarding economically, since society is not used to paying women for the labor of care they perform, although what could be possibly more important than teaching our children and nursing the ill? When women manage to enter male professions such as law and medicine, they are disproportionately represented on the lower strata, with lower pay and fewer mobility options than men. Going back to academia, as an example, in Israel, women represent 58% of BA students, 63% of master's students, and 53% of PhD students. However, they are extremely overrepresented in studies relating to education, social work, and paramedicine, and severely underrepresented in physics, mathematics, engineering, and computer science. Looking at women's representation within the senior academic staff of Israeli universities, we find that women account for only a third. Just 17% of full professors and less than 15% of researchers within physics, mathematics, engineering, and computer science departments are women. Zooming out, women in Israel earn on average 33% less than men, one of the biggest wage gaps within developed countries. and only 14% of CEOs are women. The labor force is not the only aspect of Israeli public sphere in which women are marginalized. Women are underrepresented also in politics and culture. In the Knesset, women were never even a third of parliament members. When it comes to popular singers, one of the most depressingly recent surprising statistics is that while 10 years ago, female singers accounted for almost half of those heard on radio, today they account for only 12.5% in radio charts, with not even one woman in the top 10 most popular singers list. All these examples point to the fact that when we talk about gender equality, we must urgently address men. This is so, however, not only because it is a condition for equality for women, but because men are yet to be freed from patriarchy themselves. The sobering statistics on male violence, longevity, depression, and suicide are important indications that trying to perform according to current hegemonic masculinity scripts is no guarantee for physical and emotional well-being. On the contrary, men have much to gain from the feminist battle against violence, its ethic of care, and its struggle for a generous welfare state and a workforce that offers healthy work-family balance. The labor of care in the private sphere is not only a burden, but also a joy and a key to a meaningful life and rewarding effective connections with others. Surrendering to an all-demanding paid labor market means, in many cases, extreme stress, alienation, and loneliness. Women and men should join hands in struggling for a labor market that allows us all to be both active participants in the paid labor force and active care providers for those who we love. Regrettably, not only are almost all men detached from this and other feminist struggles, some of them are also very vocal in the current backlash against past feminist achievements. This global, intense, and sometimes successful backlash includes the appalling incel movement of men who slur women online, verbally attack them, and even go on to murder them because they believe that feminism is responsible for men's involuntary celibacy and that women must surrender to their sexual desire. Most of this movement's activity takes place online and is an extreme example of the unbelievable depth of misogyny that can be found in the virtual sphere. But the backlash is perpetuated not only by miserable and highly disturbed men who blame women for their misfortune, but also by political leaders in democratic countries. President Trump and his unapologetic chauvinist behavior towards women and anti-feminist attitudes, for example, regarding abortion and LGBT rights, is a prominent example. But he's not alone, as threats made to academic gender studies programs around the world demonstrate. Cynical and dangerous male leaders portray feminists as the enemy of the nation, as part of these leaders' overall attack on substantial democracy. They manage to turn men and women against each other instead of realizing they have shared enemies in the shape of an exploitative market, opportunistic leaders, and a militaristic culture. Sadly, I can attest to at least two great successes of this backlash, one which places Israel in a global context and one which is unique to Israel. The one which is shared by many countries is related to family law and divorce. Fathers groups in many first world countries have managed to successfully campaign for the abolishment of laws that recognize women's role as primary caregivers, although in most families they still are. Even more alarming is the relatively new trend of denouncing women for making supposedly false accusations regarding domestic violence and for alienating fathers from their children. In Israel, the field of family law has changed dramatically, although the law is in the book has not been changed. Fathers groups have endeavored to generate false moral panic based on a narrative in which men are being torn away from their children and destined to poverty post-divorce. The hard statistics reveal this narrative to be entirely fictitious. As my study demonstrates, they use fake news in relation to suicide rates among divorced fathers. They use legal terrorism in the form of multi-million-dollar suits in the US against Israeli judges and social workers dealing with the complex divorce cases in which children are involved. And they use online harassment, threats, and virtual shaming against judges, social workers, mediators, parliament members, and academics with whom they disagree. I wholeheartedly believe that there can and should be a lively debate over the legal questions of child custody and child support payment, but we cannot allow lies, threats, and the misuse of the law as legitimate features of the public discourse. Regrettably, social workers and judges are too easily impressed, influenced, or scared by the fathers group's rhetoric. I hold that as a direct result of this crossing of boundaries, Israeli mothers wishing to divorce or currently navigating the process are in a much weaker position today than 10 years ago. In fact, I argue for the death of motherhood within Israeli law. Even though, as we saw, Israeli women still mother in ways that men do not and pay a high price for it in the public sphere, the law no longer protects them, and it ignores their de facto demanding maternal role and its sacrifices. We see these changes not only in family law, but also in labor law that no longer protects women, pregnant women who are being fired, and in welfare law that no longer protects single mothers from poverty. The other successful strand of the anti-feminist backlash that I would like to highlight here, this time unique to Israel, is the alarming new phenomena of physical segregation between men and women's exclusion from the public sphere, which affects not only religious and ultra-religious communities, but the country at large. This phenomena is especially alarming in relation to the army and institutions of higher education. I'm so very proud that TAU is at the forefront of the battle against gender-based segregation in higher education and has recently decided not to allow any segregated events, including those initiated by outside organizations renting halls on campus. But feminists worldwide are not sitting idle in the face of ongoing old discriminations and new forms of harm done to women because they are women. We are all aware of the almost overwhelming example of the Me Too campaign. Thousands of women all over the world found the strength to speak up and reveal the sexual harassment or assault they had suffered from. I say overwhelming because it forced us all to realize how terribly common it is, suffered by almost all women at some point of their lives everywhere. Interestingly, the Israeli Me Too movement was born before the North American one. As early as 2013, an NGO called One Out of One launched a Facebook page inviting women to tell the stories of the sexual violence they had experienced. More than 2,000 testimonies were published, marking a new era in the struggle against sexual violence in Israel. No less inspiring is the new emergence of interest in gender studies and feminism from mainstream entities. As someone active in the academic realm, as well as the activist feminist movement for a quarter of a century, I can testify that never has my contribution been so popular and demanded. Schools, municipalities, governmental offices, high-tech companies all want to hear about women's status in Israel, ways to empower women, and how to create a roadmap to fulfill the vision of an egalitarian society. Just like in classic dialectics, it seems that the backlash had made many realize that indeed no feminist achievement should be taken for granted, and that all those who care about democracy and equal rights for all must work together against forces that seek to send us back to darker days. However, at the same time, many so-called liberals seem indifferent to the ongoing and new discriminations against women, and even cooperate with religious and conservative forces in the name of alleged pluralism and multiculturalism. Looking to the future, we are facing a huge challenge when it comes to addressing current women's needs while striving for a world in which a woman and a man are no longer important social categories. In recent years, I have students in my class who refuse to perform according to one of these two categories, choosing, for example, to combine a beard with big earrings and makeup. These students mark with their body the exciting option of an ungendered world in which we live, in which we will be able to shape our personal, familial, professional, and political biographies detached from the specific genitalia we were born with. Notwithstanding, until this vision materializes and for it to become a reality, we must face the current gender society in which we live with its categories, hierarchies, and power relations. I believe the most urgent tasks are, first, integrating gender studies and feminism into the educational curriculum from kindergarten to the 12th grade. The fact that most of my students learn about the most important social movement of the 20th century only when they start their BA studies is outrageous. Gender equality should be a basic and fundamental subject from a very early age. Second, democracy as a moral system should be protected. Misogyny, racism, and nationalism, as well as relativism, nihilism, and extreme postmodernism and multiculturalism should be answered by the insistence on human rights for all, the separation of state and religion, and independent judiciary, academia, and culture. Third, gender studies and feminist activism should study and address boys and men. understanding masculinities and encouraging feminism for and with men is crucial for the future success of the gender equality vision. We cannot get there with only half of the population on board. And of course, we must push for these three new terrains without neglecting the basic, ongoing, and still urgent feminist struggle for equal opportunities in the public sphere for girls and women, for the safety and independence in their homes, and for the individual, familial, and social prosperity. There are many kinds of feminism, and anyone who has taken part in a discussion among feminists knows there are as many opinions in the room as there are people. But our internal disagreements pale in the face of the current external anti-feminist threats. We must join forces together with all those who fear for the future of the liberal project and fight for gender equality and all other human rights for our sake, for the sake of our children, and for future generations. In choosing gender equality as the theme for the present category, the Dan David Foundation has marked its commitment and contribution to a feminist vision for all, girls and boys, women and men, LGBTIQ people, and society as a whole. We certainly need such philanthropic leadership if we are to succeed in our battle. I thank the Dan David family and foundation, and I congratulate the laureates and wait to hear their feminist visions when they come to Tel Aviv in May. I also congratulate the PhDs and postdoc students who will be able to pursue their research on gender equality thanks to the generous scholarships they are about to receive. Their dedicated work is a link in the long chain of feminist scholarship, and in some aspects, more important and urgent today than ever before. Thank you.